Hey guys, it's Gotzi here. Welcome back to another video. As promised, I'm going to show you guys today a new rotation for Spellsword CDS players. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, I am not the original creator for this build. This build was first found by Xia Yu on Chinese servers. And a big shout out to OYO of my guild Minerva, because at first I thought this build was completely shit, but it turned out this build was actually not shit and can put up very, very competitive numbers, as he has proved to me. So, this build involves the glyph polarisation. Now, if you mouse over the text in the game, it says the formation of yin and yang increases and can also be used levitating, cancels your own CC when used. But what the glyph doesn't tell you is that it also removes the global cooldown for your formation of yin and yang and thousand swords. So it enables you to do this. With the help of Lightning Log, you can cast Formation of Yang Yang and Thousand Swords within the same frame. There are a couple ways you could do this, but what I would recommend you to do is that you would drag out two Formation of Yang Yangs and Lightning Log onto three different key bindings. Now if you look at my mouse at the bottom over here, I actually put them on my numpad 3, 2, and 1 other than my normal keybinds. So whenever I need to do this combo, I just quickly go over to my numpad and go 3, 2, 1 real quick, and automatically the combo is just there. Wherever you place the keys is entirely up to you, but 3, 2, 1 just works best for me. Without further ado, I'm going to show you guys the rotation, and then at the end I'm going to tell you guys my thoughts on the pros and cons of the build. In the opener, we're going to do something a little different. So, Crane Sword into the combo and a 5-star CDS, Spellsword Focus into a 4. Now because we have the Serenity Glyph, at this moment we will have 4 stacks of Sword Intense, and if we pump in another Crane in there, we can do another 5-star CDS. And then Sword, Sword, Crane, Sword, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword into a 5-star CDS. Now right before the Thousand Swords, we're going to squeeze in another Concussion Sword before our SSF into a 5-star CDS. And then Crane, Sword 3 times into a 4. Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword into a 5. We're going to squeeze in another Concussion Sword before the SSF over here. And that concludes our opener. So let me go through that without pausing for you guys one more time. Crane Sword into the combo. Spellsword Focus into a 4. Crane 5. Sword, Sword, Crane. Sword, Sword, Crane. Sword, Crane, Sword into a 5. Concussion Sword, SSF, Thousand Swords into a 5. And then Crane, 3 swords. 4. Then Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword into a 5. And then Sword, SSF. Ends our opener. From the opener, there are 2 sets of rotations, rotation A and rotation B. You're always going to do rotation A twice into rotation B, come back into rotation A. So AAB, etc., so on and so forth. In rotation A, we're going to do Sword, Crane, Sword, 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 Crane, Sword, Sword into a 4. And then Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane into a 5. We're going to squeeze in another Concussion Sword over here into SSF, and we're going to go back over here, Sword, Crane, Sword, Sword into a 4. Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane into a 5. Squeeze another sword before SSF. Now here's the catch over here. Now, as some of you may know, if you cast Concussion Sword, there is a brief window where even after you cast CDS, you can fill in 2 more Concussion Swords to fill out the combo. So Concussion Sword, Spellsword Focus into a 4-star. And then your Concussion Sword will be still at stage 2, and if we pump it twice, we will get 1 extra Sword Intense into a 5. Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane into 3 swords into a 5. Now, this Shadow Sword over here is the only time within rotation and A and B where we do not squeeze in a Concussion Sword right before it. And after rotation B, we're going to go back into rotation A. Sword, Crane, Sword, Sword into a 4. Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane, Sword, Crane into a 5. I'm gonna go back again. Sword, crane, sword, sword. Okay, now whenever you have formation of yin yang ready, you simply apply the combo again into the rotation. Now keep in mind that you only start your burst or your formation of yin and yang whenever you have 5 stacks of sword intents. There's nothing worse than starting your burst halfway. So, and everything else within AAB is always going to be the same. Sword, crane, sword, crane, sword, crane into a 5. What I like to do is I don't usually cast Thousand Swords right away. I like to use the Cloud Dragon Strike to cancel the animation for Thousand Swords. But if you don't like to do this, because sometimes the Purify or your burst is a little bit it puts you at risk of not being able to cast your Thousand Swords again. You can just simply cast Thousand Swords and jump and continue with your combo. It's just something entirely up to you. 2, 3. Into Thousand Swords, into a 5,000 SSF. Now we're back into rotation A again. So AAB. Everything else remains to be the same. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of this build. First of all, this is the absolute highest opener a CDS player can have, and the burst will only be further amplified by elixirs, which is your Wise Mind and King Edge. It will also be amplified by Blade Heart and the Break Formation Soul Force. Number 2. This is a more formulated and set way to play CDS because there is no Claw Break Wave, there is no more monitoring stage, and you do not have to adjust your rotation according to your resources. Now, also because we cast Concussion Sword a lot more often, Crane Talents and SSF numbers will also go up. And lastly, due to the fact that our burst is really high, the shorter the fight goes, the higher our DPS will be. So at later patches, when everybody gets better gear and when the fights becomes a lot more short, this build will shine a lot more. For cons, unironically, not having Claw Break Wave means less automatic sword intents every 30 seconds. Now let's take a 10-minute fight for example. Claw Break Wave on a 30-second cooldown can proc 20 times within the fight. Now, realistically, we can manage to use it maybe 15 out of 20 times, which equals to about 30 sword intents. Now, you be the judge of that. Number 2, this build is a lot more difficult to recover from a bad rotation or when the boss puts you into a rough situation because we do not have, once again, we do not have Claw Break Wave to rely on to replenish our resources. And lastly, since they removed the animation for formation of Yin and Yang and Thousand Swords in the next skill change, this build will become unviable because one main strength of this build is to cast your burst within the same frame. That's the end of the video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions and whether or not if you're interested in watching a guide for Shadow Sword Focus. But for now, happy soloing. Peace out.